So my name is Angel Cárdenas. I'm from CAF, Latin American Development Bank, and I have the honor to be the moderator for this panel today. As you could see from my fellow panelists, it's a very high caliber panel. And the way it's going to work, we are going to have opening remarks for 3 minutes. I'm going to provide a context also for 3 minutes of the issue at stake, and then we'll have 5 minutes of each panelist. And the big question we're trying to answer here is, how do we build inclusive and resilient cities? And I think that this is important if we think about what's happening right now in the urban world, and more particularly in the Americas. I mean, we live in a very highly urbanized continent. Around more than 80% of our continent is urbanized, and when you put it in the context of what is happening also with climate change, we are facing very difficult challenges for the next 2 decades. Just to give you an example and to illustrate the point, the Climate Change Vulnerability Index mentioned that in the next 20 years, at least half of the major capitals in the Americas are going to be tremendously affected by climate change. With that in context, or within that context, it is for civil society and policymakers to understand, and more importantly, to develop solutions in order to cope with climate change. And that is particularly what's going to be discussed in this panel, to have a practical and down-to-earth solutions on innovation, and for that we're going to have different speakers commenting on that. It is also important to think that this discussion we're having in 2022, it's also in the context of the post-COVID situation where there's low fiscal space in countries where, I mean, we're still enduring the challenges of COVID. And so we definitely need to figure it out together as policymakers, multilateral banks, or civil society, ways to move forward with that. With that context, I'm actually going to introduce very briefly all the panelists, and I'm going to pass the floor to our lead speaker that would present the opening remarks. Her name is Laura Faber-O'Connor. She's the Major Chief Sustainability Officer here at Los Angeles. She's driving the implementation of the Los Angeles Green New Deal, which is a global model for local action to confront the climate crisis. She holds a bachelor's degree in Earth Systems and Economics from Stanford University and a master's degree in Climate and Society from Columbia University. She's very well versed in the subject, and she's going to provide you with her opening remarks for this panel. Thank you. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much, Angel. I really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to be here with everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. Soy muy emocionada de estar aquí con everyone here, and es la primera vez estar en Los Ángeles. Manos, ¿sí está la primera vez? Oh, okay. Well, welcome. Really wish you have a wonderful, wonderful visit here in Los Angeles. This has been an incredibly exciting opportunity for the city of Los Angeles to host the Summit of the Americas. Not only is the region of extreme and utmost importance to us here in Los Angeles, to the mayor personally, as a Latino mayor, it is extremely important to us to foster international collaborations on all topics that are being addressed here at the Summit of Americas. And then, of course, close to my heart and close to Mayor Garcetti's heart is working on climate change and sustainability. And so really proud to be on this panel with some amazing folks that I've gotten to know over the course of preparing for the panel, and really think that everyone has such an incredible wealth of experience and insights to share, but we also are really looking forward to hearing from all of you. So just a bit of context about where you are in Los Angeles and what is going on here in LA. You know, Mayor Garcetti just came off of being the chair of C40, the Global Climate Leaders, City Climate Leaders group that you will hear more from my good friend Manuel in a little bit. And it was one of his most proud opportunities as mayor, because it was an opportunity to really showcase and lift up the work that cities are doing on climate change, but also challenge cities all over the world to work together to set the bar and to meet the bar of the climate emergency. And he really has taken that charge to heart here in Los Angeles. We are not immune to the perils of climate change. We see significant threats through extreme prolonged heat. We see, we are in the midst of a historic drought in Los Angeles where we have to conserve beyond anything the city has ever experienced in terms of the need for conservation and to completely remake the water system in LA. And we are transitioning our grid to a completely decarbonized grid. So just to give you a sense, in 2019, Mayor Garcetti released LA's Green New Deal. And as was said, we really, and thanks to the partnership with C40, we're able to make that plan a model for how a mega city like Los Angeles can uphold the Paris Agreement. What does it look like to actually keep to a science-based target and to set a clear plan that prioritizes equity and the most disadvantaged communities in Los Angeles, to prioritize the development of a green, prosperous economy and ensure that people that are now working in the fossil fuel sector, of which the fossil fuel sector is quite active here in Los Angeles. I can speak more to some of those issues, but also ensuring that vulnerable, hard to reach communities really have a chance to be leaders at the ground level of the development of a green economy. And we couch all of that work in what we call the 5 zeros: a zero carbon electricity grid, zero carbon transportation, zero carbon buildings, zero waste, and zero wasted water. And when we approach solutions around each of those 5 zeros, we really try to do that, and the mayor challenges us to ensure that we're doing that through a lens of equity, focusing on the resilience of the city, and focusing on opportunities for a prosperous economy. On top of that, the development of those goals and the implementation of our work is really guided by our relationships with the communities that we serve in Los Angeles and the organizations within broader civil society that really have been helping shape the progress that we're making, helping us really understand the challenges, and making sure that what we're working on is grounded on the needs of communities. So I just wanted to take through a couple of examples. First, the city created the really first ever that we've seen anywhere in the world, Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. And that office is intended to really develop a new co-governance model with civil society on the prioritization of climate actions, both in what the city prioritizes to do and how we do it. That included and has included creating the Climate Emergency Commission. This is a statutory commission now in the city of Los Angeles that is made up, the commissioners are made up of the top most vulnerable, disadvantaged communities in the city of Los Angeles, representatives from those neighborhoods, representatives or young people, youth, indigenous members of Los Angeles, because we are ceded an unceded territory of a number of indigenous tribes to Los Angeles. Folks working in small business, workers themselves, really guided by science experts. So really having civil society brought into the fold of our climate work. We also, the mayor has really, really heard the call of young people in Los Angeles and around the world. Not only worked with C40 to develop a global youth and mayors forum, but also developed LA's first ever Mayor's Youth Council for Climate Action and have tried to empower young people throughout LA. We're now in our 4th cohort to really tell us what matters to them, help them engage with the policy process in Los Angeles, and work in their communities, work in their schools. And one final example that is going on also right now in Los Angeles is we've teamed up with the County of Los Angeles. So the city of Los Angeles represents 4 million residents, and the county represents 10 million. And so, we are, of course, the largest of 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles, but together, the county and the city have committed to ending oil drilling in Los Angeles, one of the most representative areas of decarbonization and challenging areas of decarbonization that we are pursuing in the city, because we have some of the most active urban oil drilling in the world here. And as we work on the policies to actually phase out the process itself, we are conscious that there are workers who are right there on the front lines, in the fields, in people's essentially backyards and down the block, who are working in this industry. And we need to make sure, as we are developing policies to phase out these kinds of operations, that we're working with communities that the oil drilling is taking place in and workers themselves to plan for what that transition needs to look like over time. And that's happening in real time with workers, disadvantaged communities, workforce development experts, even some of the oil companies themselves. So we really take to heart the need to work with civil society in Los Angeles, and we're always looking to challenge ourselves to meet the needs of communities, and that means strong, strong stakeholder partnership. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Lauren. I'm just going to probably summarize two major takeaways I got from the opening remarks, which I think could actually make a great link with you, Christine. So the first one, as you can see, the 5 Zeros initiative, it's a good example of urban planning in order to uphold the Paris Agreement. So it's very interesting, and I think it's a very learning from all Latin American cities or across the Americas. And the second one is the way Los Angeles put civil society in front in order to co-lead or to be the co-leader in this initiative in order to ensure the governance and that to make this transition sustainable. And that actually allows me to introduce my next panelist, Christine Miller, who is an executive at Eco Building. She holds a bachelor's in liberal arts and science from Southern Oregon University. She has worked at Eco City since January 2021, which is an NGO that leads the longest running conference on sustainable city planning and was founded in 1992. And I think my question to provoke your thoughts, Kristen, is particularly like that last part Laura mentioned about like how important is civil society in order to make this initiative sustainable, and what can we do in order to have them as a partner to promote that transition into a greener economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with all of you here in Los Angeles. As all of us know, civil society organizations are extremely important as catalysts in this transition to more resilient and inclusive cities and circular economies. So it was really nice to hear the examples of Los Angeles. We're neighbors up north. And I'd like to share some examples of some of the things that my organization has been working on in the San Francisco Bay Area. So our organization, Eco City Builders, was founded in the early 1990s by urban ecologists in Berkeley, California. And a lot of our early years featured local demonstration projects that were like demonstrated pieces of good, healthy urban ecology practices. So for one example, in the mid-1990s, we freed an urban stream, a creek, from its underground culvert, and we created a mile-long park. And this project was one of the first examples of creek daylighting in the United States. And we started to work with more with developers and architects to design new transit-oriented development with features like rooftop access and greenery. So we were really interested in urban design and architecture. We're also interested in slow streets, in creating bicycle lanes and planting urban orchards. We began to lobby and successfully co-author urban policies through our advocacy work. We wrote the Eco-City Amendment to the 2001 Berkeley General Plan. We wrote a solar greenhouse ordinance and a residential energy conservation ordinance called RECO. So we started to have success not only in doing physical projects, but influencing and establishing new laws at the local level. And these have stimulated some of the work that we're now doing at an international level. One is through our International Eco-City Standards Project that we launched in 2012 with the British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver. And we're also cultivating the knowledge of sustainability and circularity through our conference series, EcoCity World Summit. The next one's going to be hosted by the City of London, the new mayor of the C40. And we're really looking forward to that. And we're hoping to bring the conference back to Latin America in 2025. So if anyone's interested, please let me know. So we're, over the years, we've been starting to share our practices more with the Americas. And I'll just share one example. We were partners in an initiative called Secondary Cities, which was a field-based initiative with the U.S. Office of the Geographer. So we were helping to build city resilience and informed planning through partnerships to boost geospatial capacity and enhance understanding through data and mapping. We were working in Peru, Colombia, Argentina, and the Dominican Republic. And now, right now, one of the projects that we have is with UN Environment Program, Mexico City, and Arab. And what we're doing is we're assessing the co-benefits and, importantly, the financing of nature-based solutions at the neighborhood scale. So as a case study, we're working with the city to map, assess, and launch a network of community gardens across the city. And we're wanting to show how these community gardens contribute to the circular economy via the local food system, and how they provide nature-based solutions via green spaces, mitigating heat island effect and flooding, and helping improve biodiversity and soil health. So now I want to end with 3 things that we, and me in particular, think are very exciting coming up on the horizon for helping cities everywhere become more resilient, more inclusive, and more circular. So the first one is reshoring. And reshoring is the practice of bringing back manufacturing and services from overseas. It's a fast and efficient way to strengthen the circular economy by balancing the trade and budget deficit, reducing unemployment by creating good jobs and fostering a skilled workforce. The second one is open source. So over the last decade, open source software has transitioned from being a fringe technology to mainstream. And in addition to championing open data, EcoCity Builders uses an open source smart code. It's a unified land development ordinance template for planning and urban design. The smart code enables community visioning by coding specific outcomes desired in particular places. So it folds zoning, subdivision, regulation, urban design, and basic architectural standards into one compact document, and it's meant to be locally calibrated. Right now we're working with 7 cities in the country of Morocco with the smart code, completely adapted for the context of Morocco, and these cities will eventually house over 1 million people. And third, last but not least, and this is sort of provocative, I'm really excited about weighted carbon reward market policy, as posited by Dr. Delton Chen as the global carbon reward. I don't know if any of you have read the Ministry of the Future, anybody? But the Chen paper was sort of like promoted in his book, and it is a real thing. So the Global Carbon Reward, or GCR, is a proposed financial incentive for mitigated carbon. The GCR adheres to reward rules and weightings to incentivize better outcomes for people and planet. It's issued as a carbon currency backed by central banks and monetary policy. It is bankable, debt-free, and characterized by long-term value appreciation. Although the carbon currency will be a tradable asset, it will not be legal tender nor used to offset carbon emissions. It's explained in terms of carrot and stick incentives and a new pricing theory for carbon. So a GCR demonstration project, we feel, could provide amazing new revenue streams and more opportunities for good urban design and circular systems, including more innovation tracked with carbon currency and a new decentralized governance model. Because at the end of the day, there's so much to be done, and we need more incentives to get all of this work really snowballing and spreading everywhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. So a couple of things that will help me to make the transition to Manuel Oliveira. The first one, you could see the civil society influence a two-way street. Not only government need the civil society, but as you put it, Christine, you could actually be a agent of change and promote and even influence the agenda and become an agenda setter. And then the three main takeaways you put at the end: reshoring, open source, and definitely provocative, the financial innovation in carbon reward market policy is something I would definitely look into after this panel. Thank you. And transitioning to Manuel. Manuel is the regional director for Latin America C4060s. It's a network of majors of nearly 100 world-leading cities collaborating to deliver the urgent action needed right now to confront the climate crisis. Manuel is from Colombia and has supported projects aimed at reducing greenhouse emissions, including methane capture at landfills, traffic light, LED retrofitting, diesel fuel quality improvement, and implementation of the hybrid electric bus test program in Latin America. Manuel, before I pass the floor to you, I think the question is, how, being from the C40s initiative, do you see local governments can help to make the transition into a greener economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. And thank you very much, all of you, for being here with us, spending your time in this session, and for my colleagues to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. And when I was preparing for this session, I thought, there is something else I need to recall among us, which is that maybe most of us have seen Jurassic Park. And I said, there is something that we need to have in mind all the time, which is that 65 million years ago, dinosaurs were the kings of the earth, and they were wiped out. They disappeared. And why was that? Because there was a change in the climate caused by certain events that took place during those years. And there is no single one around. They are underground, and they are offering us energy. So that's all we have about the dinosaurs that disappeared. And then, along the road, human beings began to appear 6 million years ago, and only 12,000 years ago, we became what we are now. But it took around 7,000 years to build the first couple of cities in the world. One in Mesopotamia, Europe, and the other one in Peru, Caral, more or less at the same time. And then cities became one of the most important creations of the human beings, because there are a few things that makes us different from the dinosaurs. We are intelligent, in theory, in principle, and we are able to change the environment. And we have done that for many years in a way that not only we have been able to build cities, but to destroy the cities as well. And we have also been able to change the environment in so many ways by increasing population, by increasing the surface temperature, increasing the amount of paper that we use every day, wiping out species that were supposed to be with us along the road, and increasing the amount of cars that are using a lot of energy that we shouldn't be using, and increasing the whole of the ozone layer, and increasing the amount of waste that is being dumped instead of being reused. And this is great that we are moving around the line of reusing and closing the cycle for waste. But most important thing is that we're doing something that is changing the future of the humanity, which is changing the climate, as it happened 65 million years ago, at least. So why do we need to do something? Because we don't want to be wiped out in a few years, in a few centuries of this earth. And for that purpose, we have understood that the best way we can work and we can tackle the problem is working with mayors, because mayors are there to solve the day-to-day problems citizens are facing. And those that I mentioned are some of those problems that mayors need to sort out. But all those problems everything we do every day is connected to CO2, to carbon dioxide, and with emissions, carbon emissions. And most important thing is that while we are trying to tackle carbon emissions, we also need to adapt the environment to the new reality that probably is going to come faster than we imagine. And adaptation takes us to resilience. If we don't adapt, we are not going to be resilient at the end of the day. So we are working in C40 with mayors that are really fantastic, around 100 mayors. Most of them has finished their climate action plan with concrete actions in several areas. They have prioritized some areas, and exactly those that are consuming more energy are those that are going to let the dinosaurs there down of the earth. Those are transport and buildings. So transport and buildings are very important subjects because they consume most of the energy in the world. I'm not going to talk about deforestation. That's another issue. There was other discussion, but cities are not totally related to deforestation, but are connected anyways. And when we are talking about transport, and I'm not going to stop on how C40 works, we want to let you know that thanks to the connection of mayors to their powers in transport, we have led Latin America to have around 4,000 electric buses running or ready to be running during these days. And why is that? Because we broke most of the ideas that were built against electric transport, zero-emission transport. And one of those ideas is that it's very expensive, too expensive. Capital cost makes it impossible. And you can read it. I mean, there is a lot of myths around zero-emission transport. And we have broken all those myths with the help of the mayors. Mayor Garcetti was one of the most important mayors in C40, showing the road, showing the path in Latin America, and saying, keep doing, keep acting, keep showing results. And there we are. So we have shown that it's possible the transition towards zero-emission public transport that need to be enhanced and increased in a faster way, not only in Latin America, but in many other parts of the world. And why is that important? Because in Latin America, 2 cities have around 3,200 buses already running, and each of those cities have more buses in the world as a city outside China, and they are increasing the path, the amount of buses that are going to be taking away or sending away all the diesel buses or gas and CNG buses that are on the streets. So that's one of the subjects, and that's thanks to a recent project that we have in place called Zebra. And we have got bus builders, investors, and cities working together to make this happen. And this is happening, and we now need to move ahead in other areas of transportation. Now, I want to say that thanks to the trends in moving away from fossil fuels in transportation, if we do that for around 22 cities, we're going to be saving around $64 billion in energy, based on the difference of prices and based on the difference in efficiency of the electric energy compared to energy coming from fossil fuels. That is equivalent to what CAF has analyzed, which is around the amount of money, half the amount of money that we need to spend for water treatment in Latin America. So imagine the amount of money that we're talking about here. So we need to work a lot in that line. Now, having said that, it's not enough, to work in transportation. Of course, we are going to be working in energy transition in buildings as well. But we need to say that we need to change the way financing projects is happening now. We need to go to think out of the box. We need to figure out what cities really need. And this is something mayors in Latin America have shown us, saying that we don't need more loans as usual. I mean, 10%, 15% interest a year, or even 5% interest a year, 5 years, 10 years, we need to sort out that subject. We need a green climate fund working for cities with banks in order to reduce the interest rate to close to zero or zero in the long run. That's why the Paris Agreement created the Green Climate Fund. But now it's working as another bank, another multilateral bank. So we need to sort out that subject. And also, we need to work about migration. Migration is an issue that we're facing, that mayors are facing, and thanks to the new council that we have and a forum that we organized with mayors, we are finding ways to deal with a human need, which is helping people that is moving because of climate change to the cities or to another places to survive because the risks of climate change. I'm going to stop there because I could be a little bit forever, bringing examples and figures, facts and figures that I love. But I just want to say that this is happening thanks to mayors around the world, thanks to the leadership of the mayor of Los Angeles, and now the chair of C40, the mayor of London. Thank you, Armand.
Thank you, Manuel. So a couple of things just to keep in mind as we move forward with the discussion. Manuel brought also another actor on the table, not only public sector and civil society, but also brought the private sector in order to collaborate and to develop innovative solutions, and especially in the sustainable transportation as it came. And but anyway, I'm going to pass the floor to Mario Coronado. He's the Director of Public Affairs of Telefónica Latin America. He was previously the Director of Telefónica Foundation and later the Director of Regulation. Mario is an electrical engineer from Universidad Nacional de Ingenieros de Peru, and he holds an MBA from Yale University. And again, the question is, what do we do in order to move forward with this transition?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Clearly, the pandemic has highlighted the need for communications and technology. And we think that that technology and digitalization of our cities is a key enabler of a prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive environment. The post-pandemic economic recovery will be one that requires the digital, and it's clearly part of it. But for all this to happen, we definitely need alliances. We need to work together. And I think that that's the key issue that Manuel was bringing up. We, as Telefónica, have been working in digitalization throughout Latin America, and we've seen that in the last couple of years, the jump in consumption of internet has been probably 2 to 2.5 times what we had before. This is our expectation for the next 5 to 10 years, which have been brought to the present right away. That means we need to deploy fiber networks throughout as a society, and that requires a huge amount of investment and a huge amount of trust in both sides. I think that one of the key issues for that investment process to happen is a regulatory framework that provides competition and provides a space for predictable regulation, something that can be looked upon, something that one can feel at ease by investing. Why is this important? Because the telecommunications per se bring a key issue that reduces pollution by itself. The impact that it has in different industries will definitely will have a reduction in CO production. The green transition and the digital transformation are two things that are coming together. We need them both, and they happen together because of the information that is required for that to be happening. One of the things we've seen is that as soon as we start identifying behavior in cities that can drive decision-making improves. And that decision-making can be key to reduction of carbon production, key to improve quality of life and services throughout. For that to happen, one of our key examples in improving digitalization has been something called Internet para Todos, which is a company that we've launched in the last 3 years, together with Meta, Facebook, and the CAF and the Inter-American Development Bank, as an example of being able to work together to improve and increase the number of spaces that have internet access today. And not only in the investment side, which is important for us, but in the user side as well. This company brings not only the Telefonica service, but brings Entel and other competitors to the table so that a person in a rural community can access any of the 3 companies in country that are competing with themselves, but through one infrastructure. That is something that is working well. We reached about 13,000 communities over the last 3 years. 2.5 million people have access to Internet 4G that didn't have access before that. And we have the challenge of going 4 million more people in the next 3 years. The same idea is happening with fiber throughout, and we're definitely going for an alliance model, which is what allows us to keep growing. But not only that, but one of the things that I think that is evident with technology is that is useless if we don't make a push for education. An education that has not the technology as the end, but technology as means. Telecommunications have to become like the pen. Nobody knows what technology comes in producing a pen today, but it's an amazing technology. Telecommunications is becoming that. It's becoming a technology that is nice, but nobody cares how it works. It just has to work. The problem is that for it to work, we need to know what to do with it. And I think that that's the key issue of education. As a company, we've been trying to work with local governments, regional governments, national governments, and with NGOs in different parts of Latin America, trying to reach teachers as the key enabler for that development. And we've developed tools for teachers to develop a better understanding of pedagogy with technology, not of technology itself, but the way that they teach with technology. Also tools for kids to learn faster and better. Like, for example, there's a game in Android called Oráculo Matemático, which is just an application to learn math from 2nd grade to 2nd grade in high school, whatever. That's a space where kids can really learn different things, different parts of the math by playing. We think that that's an important part of that growth that we need in learning of technology, getting used to it and applying it day to day. Obviously, the reskilling part of the transition is also important. We have a platform called Conecta Empleo, which is also reaching a lot of kids from 15 to 80 years old. And what we're trying to do there is offer nano grades, offer different ways for people to increase their technical and digital skills that can be used in any space. And we've had a lot of good results. working with universities, working with local governments, even working with professional football clubs, so that young people can do the reskilling by themselves using these tools. Finally, just wanted to say that all these efforts have to do with improving quality of life, improving the way we look at our own spaces, our own communities, and trying to use that to have an economic growth that is more sustainable for our societies and for our communities. And that can be done only if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. So to make matters more interesting, not only we are also talking about green economy transition, but also digital transition, and both are happening at the same time, and we have more pressure after post-COVID. Just before I pass the floor to Kevin, it's interesting, each speaker has been adding a new actor in the equation. Civil society, governments, private sector, and Mario just brought multilateral development banks as a source of market makers, where local financing industry cannot cover or cannot assume some risk. Multilateral development banks could actually play a major role, and I think Internet para Todos is a good example of that. So last but not least, I'm going to pass the floor to Kevin de Cuba. Kevin is a co-founder of America's Sustainable Development Foundation. Originally from Aruba, Kevin is a specialist on circular economy processes. He has worked on diverse organizations such as American States Organization and the World Watch Institute. He's an environmentalist, and he has a master's degree in sustainable development from Utrecht University in Holland. And to you, the same question, Kevin, what do we do to push forward the green transition?
Thank you, Angel. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very happy to represent ASDF. Thank you for organizers for the invitation, and dear colleagues and panel members, I think we have a very interesting topic to discuss, which is the cities of the future, how to make them resilient, sustainable, inclusive, and I will definitely contribute to the part of circular. We have launched the Circular Platform of the Americas in 2016 with the intention to think about what is it that we need to do and change in this region to allow all members of the regional society to really be part of the economic prosperity. And I start with using the word circular economy. The word economy is highlighted in this term, and what this philosophy or concept is about is questioning the way we have developed as a planet, or on this planet as human beings, especially since the Industrial Revolution, where we are currently locked into a linear economic model, meaning we extract things, our natural resources, we bring them to a place, we manipulate it, we convert them into products, they end up in the market. We as the general society, we use or consume things, and then unfortunately, majority ends up in a landfill or an undesired environmental context. And this process, we repeat it over and over, and we have not been able to, as a human society, to deviate from that and to observe and learn and recognize that this is one of the major problems why we even are talking about environmental contamination, why we're even talking about climate change, or all the other crises happening or on their way. And this is a very challenging topic to put on the table because I'm challenging the macroeconomic system of how we as human beings organize ourselves on this earth and configure our societies and bring about our day-to-day life. So if we are going to really make a change towards a sustainable setting or sustainable cities of the future, we have to start with recognizing that we need to address the economic model. And what is the alternative? The alternative is looking at nature, observing the ecology around us. The nature itself can teach us a lot of things. One of it is that most processes, interactions of chemicals, nutrients, stuff, is exchanged in such a way that they always follow a circular pathway at different levels, at very micro level, but also at macro level, meaning that these processes are continuously evolving, continuously repetitive, or interconnected. It actually reflects how we as human beings should operate on this planet. What I mean with that is that as human beings, we are the only species on Earth that has not understood the way of how to extract value from your surrounding and add back to your surrounding a positive, beneficial contribution to your surrounding, instead of contaminating it and even impacting your own long-term viability and survival as human beings. So if we start just observing nature and try to integrate these learnings into our modern society, and I'm not saying that we should go back in time, we should appreciate and recognize that we as human beings are very intelligent in certain ways, that every year we can produce new technology, microchips, etc., that can process multiple data that we could have not even imagined 10 years ago. But that same collective intelligence, we could also apply it in start scrutinizing why we extract certain materials, why we extract certain combination of chemicals and substances to produce our advanced technologies. For instance, yes, we do need ICT, we do need renewable energy technology, we do need all these types of inventions that we've come about developing. But one missing piece of all this is that we've never really thought about intentionally designing all the technologies that we use nowadays to be in harmony or compatible with the idea of having to reintegrate them back into our surroundings. So the point here is that if we start thinking about intentionally designing things for the future, and that includes cities, like buildings, whatever vehicle we're going to use to bring us from A to B, any other services and infrastructure we imagine for the future, we have to start thinking about intentionally designing it for the circularity. And there, I mean, you have to recognize that some materials are very easy to disintegrate and biodegrade, so that those are the most inputs that would fit the biological cycle that is very comparable to the ecological system. But at the same time, we have to recognize that our chemists and human beings have been able to develop and come up with new combinations of chemicals or metals, etc., that are very unique because of our own creative invention. But what we have to make sure is that they stick and remain within closed and controlled cycles for them not to end up in an environment where it's not desirable. So there's where we have to invent and try to close material loops in a controlled manner to prevent that they end up contaminating areas that are where they're not supposed to end up. So those are considered like nutrients for the technological cycle. So imagine the future where we start thinking about, when we start thinking about geographical planning, physical planning, imagine how it would be if we could revisit all the materials that we use and extract and try to implement them in a cohesive way and design them for their ability to be dismantled or decomposed after its use. So imagine a building, 50 years from now, you design it in such a way that after 50 years you can dismantle the building into pieces, recuperate the metal, the wood, whatever it is composed of, and without it losing its economic value and functionality. So with other words, you're converting it back into a basic input, raw material. And if you do that, you even can start playing with the tendencies for the future, like the volatility of markets. And imagine this thinking at a national level, from a national security perspective. You don't have to continuously extract resources from elsewhere. You have it already in your control, because the building can serve as a materials bank for the future. And even from some years from now, maybe the copper or the aluminum or whatever it is made of is going to increase in price, in value, which means that instead of demolishing a building and it represents a cost for you, it might actually become an assets management approach or project, which makes it even less costly over the life cycle of the building. So those are just ideas to put on the table, and let's see how the conversation evolves.
Thank you, Kevin. Very provocative, I would say, and it's very interesting, the whole idea of change of mindset. So we still have some minutes, and I would want the audience, we want to take some questions from you before we do the wrap up. There's going to be, I think, a microphone, and you could just raise your hand, and hopefully the microphone will... it's right there, sorry. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Kai from the Institute of the Americas in La Jolla, California. I had a question for Kristen regarding both community-based, nature-based solutions and also circular economy. I want to know if you can highlight some specific case studies in Latin America that you can point to, because it's great to talk theoretically about nature-based solutions, but also being able to actually demonstrate communities are actually being able to show the impact so that others can model their success. And similarly, for your concept of the circular economy and sort of the three spokes of that, are there places where you're seeing where the resourcing, where the open source software is being deployed, and communities are being able to benefit from that overall concept of a circular economy in their communities?
Thank you for the question. I have some partial answers for you. As far as nature-based solutions, it's something that's definitely trending, and a lot of colleagues that I work with in the UN have been doing a lot, especially in Europe. But I haven't seen as much take hold or start to emerge in the Americas. That's why I was really excited to join this new project with Mexico City and UNEP and ARUP to really buckle down and take a look at what nature-based solutions would mean for a large city like Mexico City, and importantly, how they could be further financed. So if you check back with me in about 5 months, we'll have some better insights for you, or one of the colleagues on the panel might have some better information about other NBS, nature-based solution projects. As far as circular economy and using open source, we're really pushing into that heavily with our organization and our partners. We're really getting into digital, so anything to enhance that is going to make open and digital and accessible better and better all the time. Using open source city planning and development tools like the Smart Code, which is 100% free, open source, and 100% customizable. I didn't realize how powerful it is until I started working with it. I've been working almost 2 years with it, with the government of Morocco. But I think the cities in Morocco have a similar situation to a lot of cities in Latin America, and I think that there could be a lot of transfer of that information and knowledge. But we're baking into the actions and indicators specific circular activities and economic proposals. And one of the ones I'm really interested in is, in Morocco is industrial hemp. That is just recently been allowed in Morocco. They haven't tested it for industrial purposes, but we're talking with the real estate developer there and the government about building some of the buildings there with Moroccan industrial hemp that would shift and maybe like address a serious issue that they have there with the illegal, hemp and hashish trade that's happening there, to kind of shift it over to something else that would be part of a circular economy.
But the smart code has not been tropicalized yet for Latin America.
The smart code is definitely been used in some places in Latin America. It's was first developed maybe 15 years ago by the Congress for the New Urbanism, and I do believe that they have one of the versions in Spanish language. We've redone it in French because we're working with Morocco, but I do think it's really highly valuable and interesting, and it can be adapted, 100% adaptable and open, so I really recommend it.
If I could just offer also an example from LA on the nature-based solutions question. So a couple of years ago, Los Angeles voted sort of a vote of the people on what's called the Safe Clean Water Act. And it was really to address both the twin needs of water quality and water supply through nature-based solutions. And so that's now financed through a parcel tax across the county, to then fund through different, through different stormwater basins, essentially throughout the county. And there are kind of advisory bodies and steering committees for all the different regions that are made up of government and public or civil society stakeholders to ensure that the funding that is, that is garnered through the parcel tax is going toward essentially the best types of projects. So the city will put forward a series of projects, local communities can put forward a series of projects, and these are, of course, nature-based solutions that allow for, they're building green infrastructure, multi-benefit projects. A lot of them end up being really incredible parks, lakes that offer, the stormwater capture and, of course, infiltration into some significant groundwater basins that we have, while also working through groundwater cleanup, groundwater basin cleanup, and looking at, in particular, really that multi-benefit, where are those projects being built? How are we addressing things like, of course, community beautification, greening, shade, with at the same time ensuring that sort of forward-facing is water quality and water supply.
Buenas tardes, soy Jonathan Rodríguez desde Venezuela y quiero felicitarlos porque he escuchado bastante en esta presentación acerca de todo lo que se está haciendo para mejorar nuestro entorno, nuestra economía y nuestra calidad de vida en términos de ambiente, cambio climático, las migraciones, las comunicaciones, el deporte. Pero uno de los temas de esta ponencia, de esta sesión, hablaba de inclusión. Y yo no escuché que ninguno de ustedes hablara de inclusión. Yo soy parte de una de las comunidades excluidas, generalmente. Soy parte de la comunidad LGBT. Pero también tenemos un compañero que es parte de una comunidad excluida, que es parte de la comunidad de personas con discapacidad. Y me hubiera gustado escuchar que ustedes hablaran de inclusión, porque una democracia realmente tiene que hablar de inclusión. Y en este país, el país anfitrión de esta cumbre, es el mejor ejemplo para hablar de términos de un gobierno democrático e inclusivo, que tiene el gobierno más diverso del planeta en estos momentos. Entonces les invito como representantes a reflexionar un poco acerca de este tema para poder avanzar en una agenda de desarrollo, de inclusión social y que de verdad logremos en términos de democracia la inclusión de todos por igual para poder avanzar en igualdad de derechos. Muchísimas gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Angelica Salas. I am with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights here in Los Angeles. I wanted, so you talked about the impact of climate change on migration. I would like to hear from you a little bit more about what the discussions are with the cities, the C40, the conversation about really recognizing climate refugees and actually not just seeing them as for individuals to shun away, but to protect and to incorporate that into the climate change dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and apologies if the concept of inclusion wasn't highlighted. Sorry, would you like to please carry on? We take notes that the questions and then we can answer, no problem. Sorry? We can take the questions and then we can answer, no? We'd like, okay.
I still have to take a picture, that's all. So I just have to do. That's all.
Sorry. Migration is one of the most complex subjects that all the cities and all the countries are going to face in the future because of climate change. And migration doesn't have any specific brand or gender or anything behind. It's not that selective. It's going to affect many people. But of course, the most vulnerable people are going to be the worst off along all this process. So C40 has been working in migration with mayors because the figures are very, very complicated. Around 30 million people have been displaced by 2020, and we are talking about climate change. About 70% of these people have been displaced even inside urban areas, and this needs to be tackled by mayors. Mayors need to offer shelter, offer food, offer education, offer health, of course, to these people. And we foresee that in 2050, around 260 million people are going to be displaced. So migration is not just a problem of a border or something like that. Migration connected to climate change is generating people that needs full attention from all the governments, including and mainly local governments. So for that purpose, we have gathered together the C40 Mayors Migration Council, and within this council, we have structured a task force that composed of 9 mayors are offering recommendations to C40 and to other mayors. But we are in a very early stage, and we don't have too many tools to handle the problem inside. But when we start actually with the local problems, we find out that there are climate change connections with problems, local problems, like, for instance, landslides or flooding that is moving away people, and we need to tackle that as soon as possible. So for that purpose, most of the actions, and I want to say this once, but adaptation is not receiving enough attention. It's not being taken into consideration because it's not an interesting business for some of the parties, investors, business people and the like. So we need the mayors and the cities to generate enough funding for that purpose, but we need also external funding. And it's very interesting to highlight the fact that the government of the US is already putting in motion one interesting program that is called Prepare. And Prepare has connections with Latin America, and it's going to be approved actually by the Congress. And we expect to have this program connected with the US for climate change purposes, for adaptation and resilience. And we need to work with all kinds of people, with everyone, and no one can be left behind. I don't want to get into more details, but this is something that we're working and we're facing, and it's a serious problem, especially now for areas where people live near the sea level, and they are going to need to move somewhere else because sea level is rising.
Buenas tardes. Regulo Lugo. Sorry.
Would you mind if I just have one intervention? I don't speak Spanish, but I actually did want to respond to your comment about inclusion, which I didn't quite understand all of what you said, but I think that some of these upcoming opportunities, like open source, will really open more opportunities for inclusion. Because the way that our capitalist system works typically now is that, some people up with some IP and then they create a moat around that and nobody else can use it. But with open source and opening more of these different ideas and designs and business plans, it will give more inclusion to more people to benefit from it and create their own opportunities from that. Also, the idea of these nature-based solutions that come from something like a community garden, that is a place where anybody in the neighborhood can be included in a nature-based solution that benefits the city overall in cooling down the city, dealing with flooding or increasing biodiversity. But for the example of Mexico City, what they want to do is try to include more people in the local market, the local food system, so that food that is grown by the community members of the community gardens, they can then sell at local markets. So that's another way that I feel is important that civil society groups advocate for. Like, we want to be part of nature-based solutions. We want to be part of new businesses through more open source. And the idea of reshoring or making things again closer to where people live, but what I would like to see is green reshoring. Like, bring it back, but not with all the pollution. And that's possible now because we have a lot more, advancements in our technologies. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt the flow.
No problem. Regulo Lugo, Venezuela, representante de la organización Gente de Soluciones, profesor universitario. Por supuesto, ciudades sustentables o sostenibles y el futuro de las ciudades es importante desde el punto de vista que la migración hacia países o particularmente ciudades afecta mucho todo lo que son los servicios, por supuesto movilidad, excelente, y por supuesto otros temas. En este caso mi pregunta va enfocada hacia el agua potable como insumo, que es un derecho básico para la humanidad, y cómo el agua ha venido cada vez degradándose, o el suministro de agua ha venido degradándose en las ciudades. Hablo particularmente en Venezuela. ¿Qué hemos podido estudiar? ¿Cuáles son los vectores en los cuales podemos incorporarnos para poder ayudar y trabajar en ese tema? Ya nosotros lo estamos haciendo, pero hago la pregunta en este escenario, este importante escenario. Gracias.
I'm probably going to take this one, given that for a multilateral development bank. So, la seguridad hídrica, lo voy a decir en español, de hecho yo también soy venezolano, para hacerlo más sencillo, es probablemente una de las agendas más importantes que hay definitivamente en la banca multilateral o en el mundo. O sea, el agua está en el epicentro del desarrollo, o sea, está en el epicentro de los ODS, no puede haber una buena agenda de protección social si no hay agua, no puede haber una agenda de salud si no hay agua, pero no puede haber una agenda productiva tampoco sin la seguridad del riego familiar. O sea, y esto es una continuidad territorial. El gran problema es el rezago en las inversiones que tenemos. Justamente desde el lado de CAF, nosotros acabamos de terminar un estudio y se necesitan 3 veces lo que se está invirtiendo en la agenda de seguridad hídrica en América Latina para poder tratar de llegar a la agenda del 2030. Y eso no va a pasar. Lo más difícil no es solamente el problema del acceso al agua potable, es el problema del saneamiento, donde más del 70% de la población en América Latina no tiene acceso a saneamiento básico. Cuando eso ocurre, y uno ve justamente elementos como lo que acaban de pasar durante la pandemia, y uno ve de alguna manera la visión de toda esta transición de economía circular, las perspectivas son muy negativas. ¿Qué se puede hacer? Definitivamente el impulso tiene que ser desde el lado, y aquí a lo mejor voy a aprovechar de recopilar algunas de las ideas que hemos tenido: acción de los gobiernos locales, definitivamente modelos de planificación urbana que incorporen la agenda de seguridad hídrica como prioridad. La visión de la economía circular no es la gestión del desecho, sino la gestión del recurso, y de alguna manera volver a hacer la reutilización para hacerlo productivo, y definitivamente con una visión social. No hay una solución definitivamente mágica, no es una sola cosa de un solo país, creo que es en toda la región, si hablamos de América Latina, y cada vez se está dando más esta idea en las ciudades. Tiene que haber make room for the river, which at the end is I mean, water security should come first on the agenda. If you do so, you might actually help the green economy transition, but also help the sustainable development process. I think, Laura, you want to say something?
Sure, thank you. And I think you're right that there isn't one single solution, for every region. And just to say, I really appreciate you bringing up the water issue. As I mentioned at the beginning, in Los Angeles and across California, when I first started in the mayor's office, we were experiencing the most historic, dramatic drought we've ever experienced, and on the human record, came out of that drought, and now we are in the next most dramatic drought ever experienced on human record. And so the work that we did 5 years ago is now coming back, but I think in Los Angeles, we really approach the issue of water availability, potable water availability, through a few different ways. We look at conservation. We have a huge focus on conservation. I'll get into some specifics on groundwater remediation so that we can ensure that the stormwater capture projects that we are building really can be used and stored in our underground aquifers in place of our above-ground reservoirs. And then the fourth, and really one of the most dramatic shifts for Los Angeles, is water recycling. So one of the commitments that Mayor Garcetti made in our Green New Deal in 2019 was to recycle 100% of our wastewater, that we would no longer be sending any drop of water to the ocean by 2035. And so we're completely retooling the entire city to be able to take that clean, remediated water, move it back through the city into our groundwater basins that we are remediating, that are in use now. And so essentially, completely changing the type of water that we are using for beneficial use in all different types of uses, but including potable water. Los Angeles has the largest municipally owned electric and water utility. So it's a partnership between our water utility that is delivering clean drinking water to Angelenos, alongside our sanitation department that is, of course, taking the used water and then recycling it and bringing it back into the drinking water system. And so it is this closed circular economy for water, combined with unprecedented levels of conservation and water efficiency. We have one of the most aggressive water efficiency building codes in the country, alongside significant number of incentives that our utility provides to swap out appliances, washers, toilets, all kinds of things, and with also really strict outdoor watering rules that we just restricted even further just a couple of weeks ago for ornamental turf, essentially, and non-used turf, of which is by far the largest amount of water used in the city, potable water used in the city. So it's sort of those four prongs of conservation, recycling being a huge one, stormwater capture, and groundwater remediation.
Thank you, and I want to congratulate Los Angeles, because that is closing the cycle. This is what we need, and we have been fostering these kind of examples throughout cities around the world. And one interesting example coming similar to Los Angeles is in Singapore. And a few years ago, some 10 years ago, they offered in one of these meetings like this one, some bottled water that was coming from wastewater treated properly. I went a few years ago to Sao Paulo, where there was a drought, amazing drought, 3 months almost without water, and the mayor was saying it's very complicated, this problem. We need to find ways, to bring water from other places. And this was related to the Amazon deforestation problem partially. So I said, why don't you see the example in Singapore, where they are, recycling the water? And he said, that's far too expensive. So I said, well, how expensive is to keep the city without water for 1, 2, 3 months? And the next day, he was sending people to Singapore to learn from that experience. So water is crucial, but we need to break myths. Myths are the main problem, because we believe that when we use potable water, they are totally clean, because we don't see where the water is coming from and how perhaps dirty it was before being cleaned, totally clean. So we need to close the loop, and that is a crucial one for water especially.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question and then do the wrap up.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to the panelists for really interesting models. I want to come back to the intervention of the panelist on the right, Kevin, who talked about the larger challenge of the macroeconomic model, which requires broader, more integrated thinking. I had the pleasure of working with Wangari Maathai and being in Nairobi in 1981 when the women from the country came out and said, something is happening, we are experiencing problems with water, firewood. Vandana Shiva in India, the cutting of the forest. I'm seeing today in Guyana with the oil exploration, the cutting of the forest in Brazil, and the urbanization, the displacing of rural peoples continuing and increasing urbanization. And what I'm hearing is in the north, you are finding great models to address the problem in your cities, but the problem of companies from the north going out and recreating the problem, which is fueling the migrants. The pieces are interconnected. So how are you working in a more integrated way, not just in your own cities, which is excellent, but with the companies and with the governments in the south, with organizations more broadly, to shift the mindset, change the economic model, and address the problems so that the problems are not recreated and those with the money which you have find ways of addressing them. Thank you.
If I may, Angel. I'm very pleased with your comment, Ms. Rosina. Yes, I think this is the point here of being at the Summit of the Americas, where we are talking about the future as a collective, right? Concerted action. And the message I would like to convene here is that we really need to address the economic system we are operating in. Why? Because all the initiatives of, for instance, managing water, you may have the best infrastructure in place to capture the water, manage the water, and close the loop. But there are other interrelated aspects, like, for instance, nowadays, what is very fashionable, or not fashionable, it sounds as a bad word to use, the issue of microplastics, for instance, right? It is interconnected with a completely different value chain. And that same value chain is back connected to, for instance, the petrochemical industry, where we all talk about climate change mitigation, etc. But all these processes are interconnected and lead to the undesired situation. And when you go to the root of all these causes, it's simply because how we organize ourselves as human beings in our societies, how we, organize our economy. So now going back to more concrete examples and not stick to the conceptual idea, is that I liked Kirsten's mention of, for instance, hemp. Hemp is a very interesting direction to go to in this region. You have the optimal climate conditions, you have optimal land availability, you have the crops that are really, they can thrive perfectly in this region. Unfortunately, the legal framework does not allow in every place in this continent to, produce it and to use it. But imagine that is a process that is already ongoing. And hemp can be used for construction, but not only construction, also for making bioplastics, textiles, etc. And this is not rocket science. It's not that we are inventing it right now. It has already been there as a disc industry for decades and decades. So what I want to hint to here is that this region, if you look at the southern part of this region, what are the macroeconomic activities that we have? It's basically agriculture and extraction of minerals, natural resources. Those are commodities that go elsewhere. They go to Asia, for instance, where the US capacity has offshored its manufacturing capacity to Asia, where these minerals or materials, whatever it is, natural resources are being converted to high-tech, alta tecnología, computers, cellulars, and whatever we know nowadays. And they come back through Europe, through US, and go down back into Latin America and the Caribbean and being sold at a premium price. While it's your natural resource, right? It makes no sense if you ask me from a perspective of a citizen of this region. So the question is, why is this the case? What is the power interrelationship between the regions, the economies, etc.? And how can we make a leapfrog towards a situation where you have a real economic development process that is inclusive? Because you need to include the people that are currently in the lands, in the rural areas, to gain more value for the work that they deliver, right? And not only focusing on as commodities, as food resources, etc., but combine it with technology, with innovation, with capacity, with resources to be able to leapfrog and be able to produce high quality products, technologies in this region and change the equation of dependency. And that's a big challenge. But this is what circular economy brings to you. If you understand the underlying principles behind circular economy, it's all about thinking global, acting local. You have to figure out a way how to satisfy the primary human needs first, right? And that's not only connected to security. Like I live in the country, I live in Colombia, right? 2 decades ago, you could not believe, you could not have seen the prosperity you have right now because security was a big issue. You cannot even feel comfortable of, and so after guaranteeing these basic conditions of having sufficient food supply, security, and all these other aspects, then you're in the position to really have the time to think, to reconfigure, and make the right investments that you have to make the transition possible. So again, in order to come to future sustainable cities, we have to really see things as fully integrated and not tackling things by silos. So if it's transportation, if it's energy, if it's water, whatever it is, we have to think about it from intentionally designing for the future. And what already exists as standing infrastructure, we have to figure out how to retrofit and extend their lives as much as possible, use the infrastructure that we already have in place, but in parallel, have a parallel agenda, and really as building designers, architects, construction companies, etc., they all have to come together and figure out a way to say, how can we guarantee the conditions from this point forward that all these buildings, all these elements that are contained in the buildings do not become waste, are not uselessly converted into a contaminant or a waste stream. And that is the challenge we have in front of us, and we really need to put this on the Inter-American development agenda. Circular economy merits its attention. I have not seen it, not even mentioned on the official agenda. And while Europe is 10 years ahead of us, they already have directives, policies, upcoming regulations, financing mechanisms, and everything related to circular economy. And why is it that this region, the Americas, especially having leading knowledge-based institutions in this region, strong governments, enough economic resources, and the infrastructure, and there is no coherence yet about this particular topic. It has to be placed on the agenda. Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. I think that there's a need for a reflection on the whole system and how it works. Meanwhile, I'd say that there's two issues that are important while we get there, for me. One, somebody was talking about inclusion. I think that the rural areas having access to internet and through internet having access to education are one of the key issues of inclusion from my perspective. Reaching communities, not for the communication, not for the, I mean, it's not an issue of a chat which has its own value, but the issue of reaching a teacher in that community and have access to training that it didn't have before. We're working in a region in Peru called Cajamarca, where we identified about 500 teacher leaders that were able to, using some material produced, were able to give training to about 14,000 teachers in different areas of the region. That is inclusion in the sense that they have improved the way they educate, and those kids have a better opportunity to integrate, and maybe they reduce the need to migrate and focus on the development of their own communities. I mean, my experience was for a small town to a bigger town for high school, to a bigger town for university, to a bigger town for master's degree. You know, that's the way we worked. I wish that kids can have opportunities in their own towns, and their skills can be applied to their own town. And I think that that's the process we need to look at.
Just want to provide a quick couple of examples, some specifics to a really great question from Los Angeles. You know, cities have both a lot of power and very limited power. And so we pick and choose our battles, and we try to work in the most creative ways that we can to get at these really vexing problems, because the idea of a globally connected economy and supply chains, you know, we can address in some ways by putting, you know, there are some sort of voluntary requirements, and then we can, you know, where we can on compulsory requirements. I hope that, you know, the work that first is happening kind of at the EU taxonomy level on disclosures, now the SEC here in the United States is starting to follow suit with you know, requiring disclosures on the part of the private sector of what types of climate-related activity, what does, you know, opening up their books to their exposure related to climate should shed light on some of these issues that kind of go perhaps unnoticed when in reality, you know, what is happening from a globally connected supply chain and globally connected, you know, international businesses in a lot of different ways and corporations. In Los Angeles, where we think you know, the opportunities for direct influence come in a few different ways. Certainly I mentioned supply chain. So in terms of sustainable procurement and what kinds of procurement requirements or procurement metrics we have for how government spends its money related to, you know, greenhouse gas exposure and everything else that relates to that because of where, you know, products might be coming from, and how to address well, Los Angeles won't want some type of product if it looks like XYZ through its supply chain. Similarly, so an example of that is a policy that we adopted called Buy Clean California. It was a law set at the state level in the state of California. We adopted it, the first city to adopt it locally, which talks about the greenhouse gas impact of construction materials. So, you know, requiring disclosure of certain types of construction materials and saying, you know, we will only use certain types of materials of a certain standard. So that's an example of a standard that we're setting in the supply chain. Similarly, we've adopted and have been actually recognized by the UN for our good food purchasing policy. So food, you know, the supply chain impacts of our food sources can be incredibly damaging or positive. And so, you know, we have in place a purchasing policy for food that looks at all aspects of of environmental and social impacts of the food that we purchase through, I mean, everything, if you think about the senior centers that we run, our parks, I mean, it's a significant, potential market signal that we're trying to send on that particular point. Then, as it relates to something like, price signals, you said changing the nature of global economy. So at the Port of Los Angeles, we own and operate the busiest port in the Western Hemisphere, the Port of Los Angeles. And we have just put in a price on every truck coming in and out of the port, no matter how many times, they have to pay a fee if they are not a zero-emission truck. And I'll tell you, there aren't a lot of zero-emission trucks coming through the Port of Los Angeles or any port in the world right now. And so this is a major price signal saying this is the expectation we have of the global economy coming through the Port of Los Angeles and its neighboring port, the Port of Long Beach. And C40 is an example of an organization where, okay, that's one city, but we can actually collaborate with cities all over the world to scale those types of solutions where hopefully then we can start to make much more of a global dent.
Do you want to say something, Manuel?
Yeah, very quickly. And we need to be aware of the fact that when some institutions or corporations are talking about working on environmental subjects and the like, we need to be very careful about greenwashing. And we are very careful about that, and we measure whatever they are talking about. And also, when we want to move fast enough along the green, just and inclusive recovery from the pandemic and move ahead, we need to offer jobs, quality jobs, green jobs mainly. But we need to be certain what do we mean by green jobs. And one interesting example, is that the transition towards zero-emission buses has created in Bogota 3,500 new jobs, contrary to what everyone was thinking. And now we are working with women, 450 drivers, first in the world, that we are going to prepare 450 drivers to drive 195 electric buses. Those are green jobs, but we need to be very careful about what we mean in terms of low impact or emission reductions or the like.
We have 4 minutes. There's going to be one final question, wrap up, and thank all the panelists. I'm sorry, this has been very exciting. I'm sorry, just one. We need to stick to the timing, sorry.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Greetings to the honorable members of the panel. And I want to ask something, what we, community of organized civil society, must do to access their economic model, this economic model that you are speaking about, and to improve the quality of life of Venezuelan migrants through all these wonderful alternatives present today. I would like to know, please.
Okay. Very quickly, will a green economy include incentives to increase population growth? Because there's a severe increase each time in devices and others that decrease population growth and make families smaller. We need bigger families, and we want to know if a greener economy will mean also an increase in population growth in families. Thank you.
That's a very good question. I don't know who's going to take that. I know I can't answer it, but that's a very good question. So, anyone? Any takers? 1 minute, Kevin.
This is a very challenging question, actually. The human presence on Earth, is the one that demands all the stuff that we consume every day. Like we are splitting in this space, right? We have chairs, we have all these microphones, etc. And the more people we are on this planet, the more demand is going to be for more things. And the premise behind the circular economy is that you shouldn't be worried about the efficiency behind the processes, but you should worry about the effectiveness of it or the impact it generates. So if we can make sure that the loops that will circulate in our future economy lead to nutrients and positive outcomes, then in that case we would not be so concerned about our presence and impact as human beings. But the challenge is how to reach to that point, because we talked about water. Water is non-replaceable, right? There's only so much water that is on Earth or under the surface, and that can be extracted and used for consumption. And you have the raining cycle, the water cycles, and they all are subject to retention time in aquifers, for instance, right? So you can only extract to a certain rate of pace sustainably without impacting its ability to regenerate itself. So coming to the point that there's no clear-cut answer, we can do our best, but at the end of the day, we will have to reach to a point where the population should reach to an equilibrium with our reality of how much we can extract the resources. And the question is, that's an open-ended question because nobody has a full answer on that. And the way we are going now for the next 2050, how many billion people are we going to be on the planet? About 9.5. And the question is, how are we all going to satisfy our needs and have a roof on our heads and supply the food, the energy we need, water, the air? So at the end of the day, we have to realize that without the ecology, we as human beings will not survive. So we have to make sure that we are in harmony with it, meaning we have to protect our existing stock of natural resources, meaning the Amazon and all the natural areas, because those are the mechanisms that, and the ocean that provides us with the basic need of oxygen for breathing. So there's no clear-cut answer to the last observation and question. It's an open-ended question where I challenge anybody to have a clear-cut answer on.
Thank you, Kevin. You really made me thinking. Thank you all. It has been a wonderful panel. Thank you very much to the audience. That's been very interesting. And well, I'm sure they're going to stick around, and you can probably ask them more interesting questions like the last one. Thank you. Have a good day.